At 82, I've seen what happens when people don't value themselves. And trust me, it quietly destroys everything. Let me share what you should never allow. I wasn't sure if I would even make another video. Truth be told, I hesitated for days, but something in my heart kept nudging me back here. And before I say anything else, I just want to thank you. The kindness you showed me on my first video, it truly meant more than I can properly put into words. At my age, you don't expect strangers to listen, let alone care. But you did, and I felt it. I really did. So if you're here again, or even if this is the first time you've stumbled across my voice, I'm grateful you're spending these moments with me. And if you feel like staying a little longer on this journey with me, you're always welcome to come back. It would mean a lot to have your quiet company here. You know, self-worth is not something we talk about when we're young, at least not in the way we should. We talk about success, about love, about fitting in, about being liked. But nobody really sits you down and says, take care of how you see yourself, because that will shape everything. And I wish someone had told me that. I grew up in a time where being agreeable was seen as a virtue, especially for women. You smiled when you were uncomfortable. You stayed quiet when something didn't feel right. You gave more than you had because that's what good people did. And for a long time, I believed that was enough. I believed that if I just kept being kind, kept putting others first, life would somehow return that kindness to me. But life doesn't always work that way, does it? There was a time in my life, I must have been in my early 30s, where I found myself constantly trying to earn love. Not receive it, earn it. That's a very different thing. I adjusted myself to fit what others needed. I laughed at things that didn't feel funny. I ignored the heaviness in my chest when something felt off. I told myself, this is just how relationships are. You compromise. But what I didn't realize back then was that I wasn't compromising. I was disappearing. And it doesn't happen all at once. That's the dangerous part. It happens slowly, quietly. You give up a little piece of yourself here, then another piece there, until one day you look in the mirror and you don't quite recognize the person staring back at you. Not because you've changed in a beautiful, growing way, but because you've been shrinking, making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. I stayed in a relationship once, much longer than I should have. Not because I was happy, but because I was afraid. Afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid that maybe, just maybe, this was the best I deserved. That thought, it's a heavy one. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And those whispers can stay with you for years if you're not careful. I remember one evening, sitting at the edge of my bed. The house was quiet, and I felt this overwhelming emptiness. Not loneliness exactly, but something deeper. It was the feeling of being unseen, even when someone was right there beside me. And that's when it began to dawn on me. I'd spent so much time trying to be enough for someone else that I had forgotten to be enough for myself. And let me tell you something. No one comes to rescue you from that place. Not because they don't care, but because they often don't even realize you're there. When you constantly show up as the strong one, the giving one, the understanding one, people start to believe that's all you need to be. They don't see the quiet exhaustion behind it. Self-worth. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention, but when it's missing, everything feels just a little bit heavier. You second guess your decisions. You tolerate things you shouldn't. You accept apologies without change. You ignore your instincts because you don't trust yourself enough to listen. I ignored so many red flags in my life, not because I didn't see them, but because I didn't believe I had the right to walk away. That's the truth of it. When you don't value yourself, you start negotiating with things that should be non-negotiable. You convince yourself that discomfort is normal, that disrespect is just a misunderstanding, that your needs are too much. And I wish I could go back and gently take my younger self by the hand and say, "You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to walk away from anything that makes you feel small." But we don't always learn things when we're told, do we? Sometimes we have to feel them, live through them, sit with the consequences of not knowing our own worth. There came a point in my life, much later, when things finally began to shift, not in a dramatic, life-changing moment, but in small, quiet realizations. I started noticing how I felt after certain conversations, how drained I was after being around certain people, how uneasy I felt when I said yes to things my heart was quietly resisting. And for the first time, I paused. That pause, it's powerful. Most people don't give themselves that. They react, they accommodate, they adjust. But they don't pause long enough to ask, "How does this feel to me?" I began asking myself that question more often. And the answers weren't always comfortable. Sometimes they showed me that I had been abandoning myself in ways I didn't even realize. But slowly, very slowly, I started making different choices. I said no, even when my voice shook a little. I stepped back from people who only seemed to take. I allowed myself to sit in silence without rushing to fill it with someone else's presence. And yes, it was lonely at times. I won't pretend it wasn't, but it was a different kind of loneliness, one that didn't come with the weight of pretending. And here's something I've learned after all these years. Being alone is not what breaks you. Staying somewhere you don't belong, that's what does. There is a quiet strength that comes from choosing yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in an honest one. It's not about shutting people out. It's about not shutting yourself down. I used to think that self-worth had to be proven, that it came from achievements, from being needed, from being appreciated. But now, at 82, I see it differently. Self-worth is something you carry, even when no one is clapping for you, even when no one is watching. It's in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you honor your feelings, in the way you walk away from things that hurt you, even if it's hard. And I know, for some of you listening, this might feel far away. Maybe you're in a place right now where you feel stuck, where leaving feels impossible, where choosing yourself feels like losing everything else. I understand that. I really do. But sometimes, choosing yourself doesn't start with a big decision. Sometimes it starts with a small one, a quiet one, like listening to that little voice inside you that says, "This doesn't feel right." And instead of brushing it aside, you sit with it. You don't have to fix everything overnight. Life doesn't work that way. But you can begin, gently, patiently, without rushing yourself. And please remember this: people will treat you the way you allow them to, Not always intentionally, but consistently. And when you start valuing yourself, truly valuing yourself, things begin to shift. Some people may fall away, and that can hurt. But what remains will feel lighter, more honest, more real. I lost people along the way, people I once thought I couldn't live without. And yet, here I am, still breathing, still learning, still finding peace in places I never thought I would. If I could leave you with anything, it would be this quiet reminder. You are not here to earn your place in this world. You already have one. You don't have to prove your worth by over-giving, by over-explaining, by shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's comfort. You are allowed to exist fully, as you are. And I know that's not always easy to believe, especially if you've spent years being told otherwise, or made to feel otherwise. But beliefs can change, slowly, over time, with patience and kindness toward yourself. I'm still learning that, even now. At 82, I don't have everything figured out. I still have moments where old habits try to creep back in, where I question myself, where I hesitate. But the difference now is that I notice, and noticing, that's where change begins. So if you're listening to me right now, wherever you are, however you're feeling, just know this. It's not too late. It's never too late to start valuing yourself a little more than you did yesterday, even if it's just a tiny step, even if it's just a thought, even if it's just choosing not to ignore your own heart for once. That's enough, for now. And maybe, just maybe, that's where everything begins to change. Thank you for sitting with me today, truly. I don't take your time for granted, and I hope, in some small way, you felt seen or understood, or at least a little less alone. I'll be here whenever you feel like coming back.